Welcome to another episode of the Caroline Glick Mideast News Hour. I'm Caroline Glick, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Gadi Taub. Hey, Gadi.
A pleasure to be here once again.
So we have a full program today in our news hour, and basically, I think we wanted to talk about the new government. The new government, the first government in Israeli history that includes large sections of the government are comprised of politicians that don't believe that Israel has a right to exist. Either they don't want to have a Jewish state or they want to have a Hamas state. This is something that we've never seen in Israeli history. And we're going to talk about what the normalization of this new government really means for Israel. And we're going to look at it in different ways, both in respect to Hamas and the Palestinians and Jerusalem, and in respect to immigration, something that I'm sure that a lot of our American viewers are going to immediately similarities between the situation here and the situation with post-nationalist Americans now running the White House and Congress. And then if we have any time, and I'm not sure we do, we may have to devote a section of this to later, is Ilhan Omar's new campaign directed specifically against the American Jewish community and their values in social justice. So without further ado, let's start with the normalization of this new government. This week, Foreign Minister and alternate and effective Prime Minister Yair Lapid went to Abu Dhabi to gather up the fruits of Netanyahu's labors from the Abraham Accords. Israel had the official opening of its embassy to the United Arab Emirates, and Lapid met there with the leaders of the United Arab Emirates and signed a bunch of economic cooperation agreements, which will hopefully end a lot of the remaining roadblocks to further integration of the economies of the two countries, which is all fantastic. And initially, he seemed like he was being very respectful. At the opening ceremony of the embassy, he tipped his hat to former Prime Minister Netanyahu and said that he and former President Donald Trump deserve all the credit for the Abraham Accords that they worked so hard for. But then, his hatred of Netanyahu and of Trump was irrepressible. And in the evening, this was on Tuesday, he gave a briefing to the Israeli journalists who had come with him to the UAE. And do you remember what he said, Gadi?
He basically repeated he's a mouthpiece for the Biden administration and their struggle against the Abraham Accords, because the line it was the line of the Israeli left all along, is that the Abraham Accords are a sham. It's not a real peace agreement. It's just a way to bypass the real issue, which is the Palestinian issue. Looked at another way. I'll quote Secretary Pompeo, who spoke on my podcast, and said that one of the three pillars of their administration's policy in the Middle East was doing away with the Palestinian veto on all relations of Israel with any Arab entities, because that's what it was. The Palestinians have been the cause célèbre for the Arab world, and you had to nod your head to the Palestinians before you did anything. What the Trump administration managed to do is to say, we understand, we offered a deal, we understand that you're rejecting it, you always do, and so long as you're not willing to compromise on anything, we'll try other channel, and they succeeded. Now, what this actually means is returning the Palestinians to the status where they have a veto on Israel's relation with everyone. Now you can explain why this is necessary for the JCPOA.
Oh, I wasn't even going to go there. I actually want to just sort of take a pause for a second and remark about a remarkable man, Don Rumsfeld, the former Secretary of Defense in the Bush administration, who passed away this week. We're recording this on Thursday morning, and he passed away on Wednesday. And, one thing that distinguished Rumsfeld from everybody else in the Bush administration, and really in American administrations for decades before he was defense secretary. I think he was defense secretary earlier as well under I don't remember. He had such a long service record. Under Bush one, he may have been no, that was Cheney. Anyway, I don't want to go into it. But Defense Secretary Rumsfeld wrote this memoir of his time in office, and he had this incredible line in there, which is that he said that every time that he went to meet Arab leaders, the first thing that they would say was that they were very upset about the Palestinian issue. And it took him some time to realize that this was just like clearing their throat, that this was a formality, sort of like saying, how was your flight? Do you have everything that you need? And Israel is terrible, and we worry about the Palestinians. And so he said the thing is that most U.S. officials who would go and meet with Hosni Mubarak and even with Saddam Hussein and King Hussein of Jordan, and then King Abdullah of Jordan afterwards, and all of the rest of them, the Saudi leaders, all took this seriously because this is what they kept saying. But he didn't. But it took him a while to realize that it was all a lie. It was all just going through the formalities. And one of the purposes of this constant harping on the Palestinians, which opened every meeting that senior American officials had with their Arab interlocutors for decades, was that they didn't want the Americans to talk about how they were mismanaging their own finances, how they were supporting terrorism, how they were doing any number of things that were harmful to U.S. national security interests in the Middle East. And so the way for them to deflect that criticism from the outset, at the outset of every meeting, was to raise this chimera, this red herring of the Palestinians. And I really thought, that was what was guiding him all along the way. And here this brings us back to Yair Lapid attacking Trump and Netanyahu on Tuesday in the UAE, because, what did Trump's entire presidency was 4 years of rejecting all of their narratives that had been failing in the Middle East for, 30 years, 40 years. It was an acceptance of, it began with a recognition that Rumsfeld was right when he said that when Mubarak and the King Fahd and King Hussein and King Abdullah and all of these people were saying Palestine, Palestine, Palestine. They just were saying, don't look at us, don't look at us, don't look at us, leave us alone, just pay attention to Israel and sell us arms. And so the Trump administration started with that very clear and also brave recognition on the part of Rumsfeld of reality. And all of the success that they had in the region with bringing peace, with bringing stability, with ending wars, was owed to the fact that they were premising all of their policy on that recognition of reality that Rumsfeld almost alone had. Cheney had it too during the Bush administration. And that was the key to their success. And just as Rumsfeld has been demonized, really since 2004, 2005, despite his greatness and the fact that he was an incredible patriot and very, very smart and just a man dedicated to public service and to his country, Trump and Netanyahu have been demonized and delegitimized. And the goal of these people is to blot out every single thing that they did. People like Lapid, people like Naftali Bennett, and obviously Biden and his entire team, because their success is proof that these crazy and impermeable lies, that these unstoppable falsehoods that have informed all of their decisions about Middle East policy, and of course in a much wider way for decades, are ridiculous. They don't want anybody to pay attention to that. That's why he could say, like you said, Trump spent with Jared Kushner and Greenblatt and Friedman, and you can like or not like their, deal of the century that they put together, but they worked on that thing like crazy people for 3 years. It's hundreds of pages long, and it comes up with some ideas that are reasonable, and they tried very hard to base them all on reality on the ground. And so after they spent 3 years working on this thing, put it out, everybody greeted it with a yawn because they didn't want to deal with it. They didn't want to deal with reality. The only people who didn't greet it with a yawn are people like the UAE, the leaders of the UAE and Sudan and Morocco, Saudi Arabia, of course, even though they didn't officially join the Abraham Accords, but they never would have happened without the Saudis and Sudan. And they came together and they said, let's end our conflict with Israel. These people are serious. Israel is a power really at this point parallel to South Korea. I mean, Netanyahu transformed us into a regional power, both economically and militarily.
But there's also, Caroline, a very specific aspect to the current quagmire, and this is that the ability to create these new bridges to the Arab world via the Abraham Accords all depended on the growing realism of the Sunnis in the face of a real threat. Israel was the bogus enemy, and Iran is the real enemy. And so Israel does not put the UAE in any kind of danger, but Iran does. Same goes for the Saudis. And so this was the reason for this alliance, and the reason they're now shifting it back to a Palestinian veto is that this alliance is clearly disturbing their new realignment towards Iran. This is what they're trying to do, and Lapid is just their mouthpiece for that. And it seems that he doesn't even understand how this fits the larger jigsaw puzzle, because he doesn't understand that the JCPOA is not going to prevent Iran from having nuclear weapons. To the contrary, the JCPOA is about granting them recognition in the space of less than a decade to their nuclear program.
And I think you were talking about how he's just the mouthpiece of the Biden administration. I think that's true, because I think that the failed conventional thinking that we see projected to us, whether it's on CNN or the major networks in the United States or any of the other elite media in the West, is just this is all about everybody repeating one another, everybody parroting one another's lines, everybody agreeing with this received wisdom that was proved wrong 40, 50 years ago, but nobody cares. And if you want to be a member of that club, then you have to just do that. So that in order to be a member of the International Media Club, you just have to give away your ability to think independently. And Lapid, like a lot of members of this government, are members of Israel's elite media, of Israel's left-wing media. And for them, the idea of getting the approval of people on CNN or getting the approval of people on NBC or ABC News or the BBC is the greatest achievement that one can aspire to. And so none of these people who are shaping Israel's own discourse, and this isn't just in the media, it's in all of our elites, are capable of independent thought because they are tied intellectually and socially to Western elites. And so we're stuck in this loop of non-thought. That's why Lapid, is incapable of understanding anything. And I actually want to talk from this also about your book and about the immigration thing, but I need to just highlight one last aspect of this, which is Hamas, right? Yeah. So, a lot of people are saying rightly that Ilhan Omar in the Democrat Party, she's the representative of the Hamas inside of the Red-Green Alliance of the American left. And I think that's true. And like I said, if we have time at the end of this broadcast, we'll talk a little bit about her latest assault on American Jews. But we have a Hamas representative inside of this government, and that's Mansour Abbas, the head of the United Arab List. We've talked about him exhaustively. And I think we're only this week we started to recognize what it means to have, we're starting to recognize what it means to have a representative of the Islamic movement, which is a Muslim Brotherhood movement from Israel, the Israeli Muslim Brotherhood inside of the government. Because this week on Channel 20, which is the non-elite channel in Israel, is that they're the head of their Arab desk, this former IDF intelligence analyst named Baruch Yadid, he reported that on Egyptian television this week they had a discussion about Mansour Abbas, and his party and Israel. And one of the participants in it was a man named Hassan Atzfur. Hassan Atzfur, when I was in the talks with the Palestinians, when I was in the army, he was one of the lead Palestinian negotiators. So he was on this show as a senior Fatah official who's also involved with dialogue between Fatah and Hamas. Fatah, for our American viewers who don't follow all of that, is the largest PLO faction. It's the faction that rules the Palestinian Authority. Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, like Arafat before him, are the heads of Fatah. And through Fatah, which again is the largest PLO faction, are the heads of the PLO. So that's sort of the PLO, Fatah, Palestinian Authority. So Hassan Atzfur is a senior member of Fatah. He was on this program in Egypt, on the Egyptian television, and he was talking about Mansour Abbas. And he said that Mansour Abbas is now mediating between Hamas and the American administration and the Biden administration. So he's an Israeli government representative. It's a representative of the Israeli government. He's a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. He is mediating between a foreign terrorist organization, a jihadist movement, Hamas, that is controlled by Iran. He is mediating between Hamas and the U.S. government. Now, who, without knowing, without it being reported openly, who do you know his interlocutor in the Biden administration is? Any guesses, Gadi? You know who he's talking to?
No.
Oh, he's talking to Hadi Ammar. Hadi Ammar is the assistant Secretary of State for Israel and Palestinians, and he is a Hamas supporter. Hadi Ammar got his job after a stint at the Brookings Institute. He founded their office in Doha, in Qatar, which is Hamas's main bankroller, right? And this week we discovered that Qatar is also bankrolling now the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is pretty incredible for a country that houses America's largest air base in the Middle East, the Al Obeid Air Base in Doha. At any rate, so he founded the Brookings Institute branch in Doha. He's very close to the Qatari regime, and he wrote a policy paper in 2019, which is a blueprint for a democratic administration to undo everything that Trump was doing. In 2019, he wrote it after the opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem and the U.S. withdrawal from the Iran nuclear agreement. So Hadi Ammar called for the United States to do everything possible under U.S. law to have open relations with Hamas. All right? And so, and Biden intends to appoint Hadi Ammar, the Hamas supporter. He wants Hamas to be integrated into the PLO. And of course, since they're more powerful, they're more popular, than Fatah is, and all, if there were elections held tomorrow, they would win, without lifting a finger. Because they're far more supported among Palestinians than Fatah is. And so he wants to integrate Hamas into the PLO. Hadi Ammar does. He's responsible for U.S. policy towards the Palestinians and Israel. And Biden wants to appoint him to be U.S. Consul General in Jerusalem, meaning that Biden intends to, support the division of Jerusalem. He wants to bring in a Hamas supporter to be the U.S. representative in Jerusalem. And right now, that Hamas supporter, Hadi Ammar, is this is my educated guess, but I can't imagine it would be anybody else. He is working with Mansour Abbas, who is a member of the governing coalition of the State of Israel, in mediating between a terrorist organization, Hamas, dedicated to the annihilation of Israel, that just attacked us with 4,300 missiles in 10 days. Mansour Abbas is now mediating between them and the U.S. administration.
And Mansour Abbas is the representative of a local branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is amazingly outlawed in Arab states neighboring Israel, in Egypt and in Jordan, and is in the coalition here. It's mind-boggling that we have a coalition with a radical Islamist organization which is outlawed in Egypt because it endangers the secular army affiliated is not the right
because
term.
It seeks to
regime.
It seeks to transform Egypt into a Sunni Iran.
and so it seeks to do to Israel too. And they're just and this is hidden behind a supposedly civil agenda. And this is how the Muslim Brotherhood works everywhere. This is the system. This is not the exception. This is the rule. Part of their strategy is always to play moderate and then take part in governing and in creating institutions and in creating their own little welfare state, which they did because this coalition has given them an unbelievable amount of money. They got huge budgets, part of which 500 million shekel is kupa ktana. I don't even know how to say this.
It's a
slush fund that they can use without any supervision. A 500 million shekels. So this is how they build infrastructure. And once they build their infrastructure in institutions of education and welfare, they seduce the population by hot kitchen soups and by schools, and then they use this for indoctrination. And this government is just openly cooperating with this in order to stay in power. That's mind-boggling.
It's mind-boggling. It's also treacherous, and but it's part of an agenda, right? I mean, it's a part of a wider agenda that I think we should get to now, which is post-national, which is ending the nation state of Israel as a Jewish state. Very similarly, of course, to the way that all the George Soros Open Society NGOs are pushing for the destruction of national identity throughout Europe, and of course, first and foremost in the United States. And the thing that now really has been irksome since this post-nationalist, post-Zionist government came into office 2.5-3 weeks ago is that we talked about it last week. Is that there's a government regulation that has to be renewed every year, preventing Arab Israelis, or really anybody, from getting automatic citizenship for their spouses if they come from enemy states. And this has been automatically renewed. But because we have the United Arab List in the coalition, we have the post-nationalist Meretz party that is aligned with Fatah in the coalition, they don't have a majority inside of the coalition to renew this regulation that has to be updated annually.
Just to be a little more precise on how it is for those who don't know, the problem is not with states who are clearly our enemies, but ever since the Oslo Accords, allegedly the Palestinians are no longer our enemies, and so Israeli Arabs were allowed, it's called family unification, if they marry someone from the Palestinian Authority, to have that someone naturalized here. And this is now going on under human rights banners, and this is absolutely ridiculous. What the temporary regulation said was that, according to Shabak, the General Security Services, Palestinian citizens of the Palestinian Authority were also a security threat. And so on the basis of this, it was renewed for the Palestinian Authority. But the real thing never was security, although that's a consideration too.
Well, it is. I mean, you have to remember.
But the real issue, Caroline, the most basic issue, we have to keep in mind always that this whole conflict is about demography. It always has been, and it will continue to be. And this was a demographic weapon for the law of return. They're trying to achieve what they could not get at the negotiation table by dressing it up as family unification. That's one part of it. The other part is security, and the third part is this is trafficking in women. And now that the Meretz people supported those champions of human rights, what it enables Bedouins and Israeli Arabs who had seen their wives acquire modern gender equality, is to buy wives from tribal society for money and bring in their third, fourth, fifth, seventh wife, whom they can safely probably assume will be more servile. And so we're allowing this. It's not just, it's the first danger is demographic, but the third issue I talked about is the horror of polygamy, where if you ever visit, I don't know, Caroline, if you visit the Bedouin sector, but when you go and see it in action, it's just when they get tired of one wife, they get a 17-year-old girl and they push that other wife to some shack at the edge of their squatting territory, and she and her children are half ostracized and have nowhere to go and can't divorce and can't work and can't disobey their husband, and then they have children whom they don't even know. People have hundreds of grandchildren, tens of children in such families, and we keep supporting this barbarian behavior.
The only thing I wanted to underline is that there is a security problem. So Nadav Shorgai from Israel Hayom brought the data this week. It works out that Palestinians who receive Israeli citizenship through marriage, through family unification, are 3 times more likely to be terrorists than Israeli Arabs are. Have participated, and there's a smaller proportion of Israeli Arab society, but they're 3 times more likely to be suicide bombers, or 3 times more likely to be members of terrorist organizations, or 3 times more likely to, and the numbers actually, if you look at them, in different ways, the numbers go up different, even higher. But the point, I think, so that they are a security danger to Israel. I mean, they are. But I think.
But terrorism is a smaller strategic danger than
demography is. And what they had found really was that from 1994, when they began with the implementation of the Oslo Accords, till 2003, when the Sharon government passed this law, or passed this temporary order, that already 150,000 Palestinians had dual residency, dual citizenship with Israel through marriage to Israelis, so that they were pouncing on this loophole, like you said, in order to flood Israel with more Arabs, and of course, from a demographic perspective, they were actually double counting them in their censuses, so that that was how they were able to develop the demographic scare that said that Israel was going to be overwhelmed, that there were going to be more Arabs than Jews west of the Jordan River by 2001, by 2005, by 2009, because they were double counting all of these people. They were double counting Jerusalem residents, and they were double counting the over 150,000 Palestinians who were living in Israel. And that was how that was one of the ways that they inflated the number of Arabs by 50%.
And the demographic scare is a double-edged argument, because as I said, demography is at the basis of this conflict. It always has been. It was at the basis of the.
Well, it's not demography; it's Judaism. I mean, it's their unwillingness to have a Jewish state. You say demography, but it's it's specific demography. They wouldn't mind so much if we were I don't know what, if we were Turks or British. The problem specifically is Jews.
But since we are Jews, and this is the conflict, then their whole thought is directed at demography. And this is why, Caroline, I changed my mind. I became a supporter of annexation of the Jordan Valley, because Israel's primary concern is and should be preventing the Palestinians from achieving territorial continuity with the larger Arab area, because we are a tiny Jewish community in a region that has 400 million Muslim Arabs, and their weapon, and they're absolutely right about it. If you read what the Palestinians say, their eyes are also on the Jordan Valley, because this would be their demographic springboard against 2 states, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan and Israel. So in their dream, they could use this. They could use the Jordan Valley, or a Palestinian state over the West Bank, in order to bring refugees back into this region and turn the demographic balance on both counts, and by this destabilize these 2 countries in order to create a larger Palestine. I don't remember the whole Palestinian
The Greater Palestine.
the Greater Palestine territory. Thanks. And though this dream may not be entirely realistic, it is dangerous enough to reach the destabilization of both Israel and Jordan. And so the false demographic argument are a good reminder of the real demographic concerns, which we should never let slip from our attention.
I think that, again, part of this, it's weird, right? Because the left in Israel has been pushing the demographic thing as an argument why Israel should have a Palestinian state, which would, of course, enjoy an open bridge to the entire Islamic world across the Jordan Valley, that we would give it up and they would cross the River Jordan and bring in all of their brethren from Iraq and from Syria and from Saudi Arabia and so on and so forth, which is insane. But they also have this idea that Israel is evil if we don't allow open immigration and then grant rights of citizenship to illegal aliens from Africa and really from anywhere who want to be here. And I think that this is one of the themes that you bring up in your book. And everybody should know that Gadi put out a very important book last year. It was right called
Nayadim v'nayachim. It's hard to translate. It's the mobile and the local.
Yeah, well, it's movable and immovable property, right? It's people who are the jet setters who see their lives, the people who they're relating to, as people are they're more related sociologically to people who live in Silicon Valley and in New York than they are to the people who live in the working class suburb of their Tony neighborhood in North Tel Aviv, and people who just live here and don't have any intention of going anywhere else. And so, we have it all over the Western world, this distinction. They call it flyover country in the United States, or the rednecks and everything like that. People who like America and don't have any reason to get a passport because it never occurred to them that they have to leave their country. And people who think that they, in Silicon Valley, they have more in common with people who live in Vancouver and people who live in Tokyo than people who live in Eastern California. And so, why don't you talk about that in the Israeli context and, what your thing?
Yeah, the fight over immigration is here in Israel, over illegal immigration, is basically the same as it is in the United States over the southern border, and as it is over the refugee crisis in Europe. And it's always the same with the Soros foundations there, the New Israel Fund here, the progressives in the on the left wing now, the dominant wing of the Democratic Party, and it's always the same internationalist elite, which is using illegal immigration as a battering ram against the nation state. And what the central argument of the book is that they keep saying that they are declaring that they are at war with nationalism, those progressives, because nationalism is exclusive, semi-fascist, dangerous, regressive, creates international conflict. But the real behind all this lies their systematic attack on democracy. So what they are really undermining are democratic institutions, and we see this over in the struggle over illegal immigration here, because the majority of the Israeli public wants to hang on to the law of return because this is a Jewish state. And the attempt to attack the Jewish state via attacking the immigration laws is an attack on its statutory foundations, right? So it's not that the question is not solving the humanitarian problem of this or that immigrant. The question is, how do you undermine the law of return? And this is what, the New Israel Fund organizations, this is their long-term goal. Now, the majority of Israelis do not agree. The majority of Israelis believe that nationalism is part and parcel of democracy, that it's part of our right to self-determination, that Zionism has two faces. One is its democracy, the other is the Jewish character of the state. But they are unwilling, they are unable to have their will expressed politically, because this elite has transferred power from elected bodies to appointed bodies, and they appoint themselves in Israel's unparalleled strong judiciary. The judiciary in Israel is sort of an uber government, and they control their own appointments. So it's a leftist branch of government which has maneuvered to a status that enables it to subdue the two others. And so you see how at this intersection, their war on the national character of the state can only proceed if they manage to hijack democracy. And not surprisingly, immigration law is the area in which Israel's courts intervene more than any other area of policy. And it's striking how it's the same in America. And it's also striking that in America and in Israel, the progressive progressive politics also have an executive arm in law enforcement, which then intercepts nationalist or populist or right-wing politicians.
You know, we had this really interesting, I saw a statement by the police yesterday, which I just found obscene. You know, we had these Israeli-Arab pogroms against Israeli Jews in mixed Israeli-Arab cities throughout the country during last month's mini war with Hamas, right? So that, you know, the missiles were falling, Jews were being lynched in mixed Israeli-Arab, Israeli-Jewish cities like Akko and Jaffa and Lod and Ramla. And there was a statement by the police yesterday that said that the vast majority of the Arabs who were participating in the lynchings were actually Palestinian collaborators with Israel who had come into Israel and received Israeli citizenship, having been collaborators. Now, this was a stunning statement for two reasons. One is I don't think it's true. And because, you know, I've spoken to the people in Lod and they were telling me who their neighbors are who were attacking them. And nobody mentioned anything about these people being Palestinian collaborators with Israel. Although you might say that collaborators who had to run away from places like Ramallah and everything because they helped Israel in its counter-terrorist operations may want to prove that they're more Catholic than the Pope. And so they want to attack Jews in the hope that they'll be able to be permitted to go back to their homes in Jenin or in Ramallah or wherever without being murdered. So there's a possibility that that's true, but the notion that they're the majority is ridiculous. So one thing that I found obscene about it was that it can't be true. It isn't true. We know it not to be true, and the police are lying about it. And the other question is, what is the impetus behind this statement? And I think that the impetus is to blame the victim. Because if you don't want to actually say that Israeli Arabs were incited by the Muslim Brotherhood, by the Israeli Islamic movement, which is a Muslim Brotherhood movement that is aligned with Hamas, then what are you going to do? You're going to blame the victim. You're going to try to find another faction inside of Israeli Arab community to blame, and you want to take somebody that you can, in the public mind, attach to Israel, so that you're saying that it's Israel's fault, that we brought it on ourselves, that we worked with Palestinians against Palestinian terrorism, and as a result, we brought them into Israel so that they wouldn't be annihilated by the Palestinian Authority that's supposed to be our peace partner. I mean, the whole thing is so attenuated and such a lie. But you see here, you know, the Israeli deep state coming to the assistance of these irredentist elements inside of Israeli society who seek the destruction of Israel as a Jewish nation state. And it's so embedded that people don't even necessarily realizing that they're effectively committing treason when they do these kinds of things, because it's become, you know, the thing that all of the elites do. They're all sort of knee-jerk, like I was saying before that Yair Lapid is impermeable. He cannot listen to reason because in his closed intellectual universe, if it doesn't fly on CNN, it has to be wrong. And so inside of this closed intellectual or sociological universe of Israel's deep state, there's something inherently wrong with protecting the Jewish identity of the country. You know, I've seen in the United States more and more recently, you know, you look at the culture wars, which in a way have already been won. The fact that there's any question about whether it's reasonable or unreasonable for American athletes in the U.S. Olympic team to want to stand or refuse to stand for the Star-Spangled Banner is is a disaster. I mean, how can it be? How can it be, right? That the greatest democracy, the freest country that the world has ever known, that provides opportunities unlike any seen in human history to its citizens and its residents, that people would say that there's something inherently evil about the flag of the United States of America. I mean, I have lots of criticism. We voiced it here about the Biden administration, about the left in the United States, about elements of the right in the United States, about all kinds of things in the United States. But to look at that country and say that it's inherently evil, that it was born in sin, that you won't respect the flag. I mean, it's gotten to a level of degeneration that you have no idea how people are going to rise up. I mean, this is the most basic thing, respect for your flag, and you hate your country so much. You think it's so terrible, so evil. You've been indoctrinated to believe that lies are truth. I mean, this is the direction that Israel is going to be going under this new government, and
I think Israel has much more resilience and will be much more resistant to this trend, because unlike America, despite the fact that we have our forces have been fractured, we still have a very clear national majority in Israel. So I think the manipulation here is not successful. Let me just point out to you a subject which we often discuss off air, the question of the Mizrahim, the Sephardic Jews in Israel.
The Jews from North Africa and from Middle Eastern countries.
Despite many years of leftist indoctrination in schools, they have not wavered about their national commitments. So I think there are deep roots, both religious and national, in the Israeli public, and that we're not going to go down the drain so fast. I also have some faith, perhaps more than you, Caroline, in America, that it will at one point rise and shake off this trend, because the actually, I spoke on my podcast with Ilana Fishbein, who's an Israeli woman who lives near Philadelphia, and she created this organization called No Left Turn in Education, and I asked her, because we see all these PTA meetings now with parents trying to rise up against critical race theory, and all these administrators putting them down, apparently sometimes calling the police against parents in their own schools.
Yeah, it happened last week in Virginia.
Yeah, it was stunning. But Ilana has created this organization against the dominant anti-patriotic trend in education. And I asked her, what are the responses? What do you think is the ratio of the true blue-blooded progressives relative to the body of parents? And she said, in my estimate, 10% to 90%. So many people are going with the Democratic Party because they're still thinking Clinton, and though the Ilhan Omars are conquering larger swaths of the political organization of the party, I think that most Americans are in the end patriots, and they will awaken from the spell of Obama at one point, because when they realize it's actually real anti-Americanism, most Americans would not go with it. My guess, you're an American and I'm not. I'm a student of America as an academic field, but my sense is that Americans do love their countries.
I agree with you 100%. I think that both Israel and the United States are going to survive this. I think that we're going to rally, and people are going to wake up. In the United States, I think that the thing that is going to save America is federalism. I think that the fact that you have 50 separate states, that people are going to, like what we're seeing now with Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, he is emerging as the most important leader in the Republican Party, because he is showing that federalism works, that he's kept Florida open through most of the pandemic. I have a very close friend who's been trying to, like everybody, trying to sell her house in Manhattan to get the hell out of that dead town, and move to Florida. But she said, look, my apartment's been on the market, a beautiful apartment on the Upper East Side for 4 months. I've had 3 people come in to look at it. And on the other hand, comparable places in South Florida are off the market within hours. She can't sell hers, and so she can't buy one. And so, you look and you see federalism, people cling to their, they empower and they work with their state and local governments to try to stand up against the feds. And, I think that that's going to be the saving grace of the United States at the end, the genius of the Constitution, right? This balance of powers, not only between the 3 branches in the federal government, but between the states and the federal governments. And so I think.
And how striking is it that all these sane people who are rising up to defend America are also friends of Israel? It's like you're never wrong about these things. Those who are patriotic Americans, except a wild fringe that has been blown out of any proportion on the fringes of the right, like the actual white supremacists, then patriots are supporters of Israel. And maybe a last word before we end on what we talked about before we got on air, about how or maybe what you mentioned in the beginning about Ilhan Omar and her quarrel with the Jews, because it's true on the other side as well. The progressives are going to be anti-Semitic. It's a law, and all those Jews who are thinking, if we bend backwards enough and be Peter Beinart and reject Zionism and adopt all the progressive everything, then they'll be good with us. Then we'll bring our tikkun olam to the progressive movement. We are the tikkun olam, right? That was your phrasing. I don't want to compare with reform in Germany. I don't think there's going to be another Holocaust, but the trend is going to be the same. You're not going to gain points for yourselves by sucking up to the progressives.
No, I think you're right. There is a confluence of interests, which is why, and of values, which is why the progressives in Israel feel so at home and comfortable with the Corbynized Democratic Party in the United States today, because they're trying to do the same thing in Israel. They do the same thing in European countries as well. I mean, they do share the same post-nationalist values. They do reject democracy. They do see transnational institutions like the UN, like the EU, and even like the federal government, for that matter. If you look at it as a transnational government that's trying to repress the states and prevent them from governing in according to federalist principles. When you look at them, you say that, yeah, they do share common values. And the reason why Israelis, the majority of the Zionists, the Jews, feel and share such a commonality of interests and values with American patriots is because we understand the value of national identity. We think that there's something intrinsically valuable about having an American culture, an American identity, and an Israeli Jewish culture and identity, and to preserve and to protect and to defend. And so, that's why I say there are 2 Americas, but we're seeing more and more that there are 2 Israels as well. And we've gotten to the point where, the post-nationalists are in charge in Israel and in the United States, and we're in a fight. Which is why it's depressing. And I know that some of our viewers this week sent me emails saying, you're so depressing. But look, we're in a fight. I mean, we're in a fight. What can we do? I mean, that's the truth, and thank God, we have justice on our side, and with truth, justice in the American way and the truth, justice in the Israeli way, we're going to prevail, God willing. But, just to go back to Ilhan Omar, this also speaks to it, because it's not just the Peter Beinarts, it's the Barry Weisses of the world as well, who are, very loyal Jews, who have very strong Jewish identities, who also have very strong progressive identities, and they've been trying to square this circle for a very long time, right? So Barry Weiss wrote this book, How to Fight Anti-Semitism, that I have huge problems with, because she accused without any basis of Donald Trump of being an anti-Semite and a racist. And she did it, probably because she believes it, which is bad enough. But she also did it because that's how you build up your chits in the liberal progressive world. You can't be listened to on this if you haven't agreed with them on that. So first you have to accept a lie in order to hopefully be able to promote a little bit of truth. And I think that that's a compromise that people shouldn't make. That's why I found her book to be so horrible. But look, what happened with Ilhan Omar, right? So she's, like you said, you can't keep track. She every time she changes her turban, she puts out another anti-Semitic blood libel. So, like last week, her latest thing was that she said that she compared, she drew moral equivalence between Israel and the Hamas and the United States and the Taliban. And she was talking about the need for war crimes tribunals against Israeli and American soldiers. Whatever. So this provoked an outcry because it was not only anti-Semitic, it was anti-American. So you had 12 Democratic Jewish lawmakers who signed a letter to Nancy Pelosi condemning her remarks and asking for something to be done about it. And Nancy Pelosi proceeded to attack the Jews and side with Ilhan Omar. So, and this was after, like, they wrote the letter, and then all of the progressive people in the Red-Green Alliance that controls the Democrat Party got up and started attacking the Jews and defending the Muslim women of color that they're all attacking because they're racists. All the Jews are racist against the Muslim women of color. So, you can't attack anti-Semites because they're not white, right? And so, anyway, so that was their thing, and then Nancy Pelosi sided.
When will Jews wake up, Caroline?
Right. So then Ilhan Omar. Well, that's the thing. So this is the latest. So Jake Tapper, who is a Jew, right? He's a Reformed Jew. He's a liberal progressive Jew. He has Ilhan Omar on his show on CNN, everybody's network that you got to watch. And so he mentioned, he said, look, the Jews are really upset with you. Look, all of these Jews said that you're wrong. And how did you do this? So then what did she said? I actually wrote it down before our talk. She said that the Jewish Democrats are not partners in justice. Okay. So she said, like, these are people, liberal Jews, all they care about, their lives, are about social justice, which is like the rough translation of their way that they translate tikkun olam. The American Jewish founding myth was not, as opposed to every other Jewish community in the world, their founding myth was in 1963. It was not, 3,400 years ago at Mount Sinai and the parting of the Red Sea. Their founding myth was the freedom rides.
64, the Summer of Love.
Well, it was when Schwimmer and Cheney and the other fellow were murdered in the freedom marches in the South, and they were participating in the sit-ins and the lunch counters, and they were marching with Martin Luther King. That was the beginning of Judaism as far as liberal Jews are concerned, right? And before that, the genesis of the exodus of the American Jewish imagery was the labor movement and the Jewish leadership of the labor's movement, of the International Ladies Garment Union that fought in the sweatshops in the Lower East Side of New York. And so, these were the founding myths. This is all about social justice. All they do is social justice. That's all they are. That's all they know. And here's Ilhan Omar says that the Jews are not partners in justice. And then she went on and said she knows what it feels like to experience injustice in ways that many of my colleagues don't. So they're privileged. And
Jews have always had it so nice.
Right.
They've always been top dog, right?
Right. My grandmother didn't have to change her last name because she couldn't get a job because her last name was Komsky. Nothing. There's never been any problem. My grandfather didn't graduate Cooper Union and then had to open a sweatshop because he couldn't get a job as an engineer because no engineering firms would hire Jews. No.
And of course, all Jews escaped the Holocaust.
Right. No. They forget the Holocaust. I'm just saying American Jews that weren't in the Holocaust. They never suffered anything, And then my dad couldn't go to Princeton because they had mandatory church every morning. I mean, all kinds of things, right? Everybody's suffered it in one way or another. Institutional, systemic anti-Semitism, whatever. But no, Jews never had to deal with any of that kind of injustice. Only she did, she came from the ruling class of Somalia, and she came to the United States and immediately was pampered, but she's suffered injustice, and she's a Muslim woman of color, and how dare they? So this blew up the brains of a few liberal Jews, right? And so they're starting to wake up, saying, wait a minute, this woman isn't attacking Israel. She's not attacking Israeli Jews with guns and, who walk around with Uzis or whatever. No, she's attacking us. She is saying that the social justice Jews are not partners in justice. Well, then what are we? Right? And so I think that actually I have to say thank you to Ilhan, Sister Ilhan. Thank you so much, for making it clear to American Jews that this is not about Israeli Jews with Uzis, and big kippas on their head. No. This is about them. You hate them. You hate social justice Jews. You hate Tikkun Olam Jews. You say they're not partners in justice. Now, of course, I already saw some... then she, of course, put out a clarification. She's always learning. She's growing, blah, 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 blah. So then you see these obsequious thank yous to Ilhan Omar. I think I retweeted one.
I'm telling you, they will not learn. They will not learn. They should have learned when Stockley Carmichael took over SNCC in 1966 and kicked out all the Jews from the student branch of the civil rights movement. And they haven't learned since. What they keep learning is that they should try harder. Now they're going to seek her seal of approval. Just you wait.
You were making everybody optimistic with all of this Pollyanna-ish, we're going to prevail, we shall overcome crap. And now you're telling me, after I'm giving,
Look,
my own Pollyanna stuff, that
you are way out of line with this optimism, Caroline. We cannot agree to this.
Well, let me just tell our viewers, because we're gonna cut off soon because I just can't stand it anymore. But let me just tell you something, all right? I always say, we just have to do the best we can. And, we have to keep telling the truth, and we have to keep fighting for the truth, and we have to keep fighting for our countries, and we have to keep fighting for our people. And we will win, because truth is like the easiest thing to market. If you just look at it from a business perspective, look at the trouble that they have to go through to repackage all of their lies every 5 minutes and call it something else. We just have that one package. We just have that one product. It's called truth, and we just have to get it out. You have to get it out. You have to talk to your friends. You have to talk to your colleagues. You have to be willing to stand up for it. We're going to be pushing you forward, and talking about it and arguing about it. And, there is reason for pessimism, huge reason for worry, but we also just have to realize that we're not nothing. And God willing, we're not going anywhere. We're in for an inch, we're in for a mile, and we're going to keep plowing ahead and trying our best. So that's that, right? And so subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our Rumble channel, buy subscriptions, buy them, whatever. Maybe we'll start selling them soon. But meantime, just sign up.
So long as you get them free. Grab them.
Sign them for now, for free, right? Give them to all of your friends.
The strategy should be, if you get it free now, you keep it free. Yeah? We're not going to cheat you. Get it now free.
Well, we'll decide. What we'll do is, did you guys read Catch-22? There was this part where they were censoring all the letters home. Yossarian was all of the letters, and they were supposed to censor him, and he was bored. So sometimes he would censor him by taking out all the verbs from each sentence. Sometimes he would just take out every other word in a sentence just for fun. He would take out all of the direct articles, I think one time he took out the prepositions. So the basic idea here is, we may keep it free, or we may think of some random way to charge every third person or whatever. So, you have a 2/3 chance of keeping it free. But in the meantime, it's free. Subscribe, get subscription, do something really funny. If you have email lists, just subscribe every single member of your email list, and then they can unsubscribe.
No, we're doing pretty well on subscriptions.
We are doing well. We're doing well. We want to build up our base, and we want to do it without paying a cent. So you guys have to, get the word out, and we'll see you next week, okay?
Great talking to you.
All right, good seeing you again. Bye.